Hello and welcome to Bergara Market's Vinofile Wine Club number 7. So halfway through the year, we're on our 7th edition already. So that's great. And this month we are doing killer wines not from Cali. So we're looking for kind of great quality premium wines outside of California. Of course, this is a little bit of a cheat because we know that there are a lot of great wines that come out of the United States, or that are made in the United States, I should say, that are not from California. In particular, we have done wines from Oregon and Washington before, and especially in those two states, those wines kind of, the best of those wines can equal and sometimes exceed some of the best wines out of California even. But it's always fun to go a little deeper, try different things from those areas as well. So we do have something from Oregon, we do have something from Washington. One is kind of a familiar face that we've had before, but not this particular wine. And we'll get into that in a second here. That'll be our first wine. And the wine we have from Washington is something really special. It's from a producer that I love, but have not had in years and years and years. I haven't been able to find this wine in, I guess, it's been at least 3 or 4 years, but from Andrew Will, and we'll get into more about Andrew Will winery as we get into that, and that'll be the last wine. But our middle wine is really cool, really special for a number of reasons. It comes from a region most people, or some people, may not have ever experienced before. It's also a wine that will never be made again, literally will never be made again, or at least not this exact wine. And it is crazy good. It is outstanding. I have had wines from this region before because I, for a long time, lived not too far from this particular region. And I am not overly surprised. There are great wines from this region, but if you don't live in and around the area, you probably don't know about it. You probably haven't tasted some of the best wines. And the fact that this wine exists gives me great hope for someplace close to my hometown that exists that makes wine of this great quality. So that was a quick introduction. Let's kind of get into the wines because they are too delicious to be messing around with other stuff. So our first wine is from a familiar face, or familiar label, I guess. It's Christum. We've done Christum in a previous iteration of this club before, but not this particular one. This is one of the big boys, or big girls. This is actually the Christum 2018 Jesse Vineyard. So Jesse Vineyard is one of their single vineyards. When we did Christum, we did the Mount Jefferson Cuvée, which I love. And that was in our Old World, New World. We compared the Mount Jefferson to a Burgundy from France. And but the Mount Jefferson is kind of like a blend of their other 4 single vineyards. But like with most wineries in Oregon, the single vineyards is where you get some real character. To rephrase that, you get more character, more depth, and you get kind of more focus in terms of production of quality. The Mount Jefferson is and was great that we had for that particular wine club in the Old World versus New World. The Jesse Vineyard is kind of on another level. They do 3 other single vineyards, Eileen, Louise, and Marjorie, and then obviously the Jesse. They're all named after matriarchs of the winery. The winery is fairly new. I mean, it was founded in 1992 by Paul and Ellen Gary. I think their son Tom runs it now, and Steve Dorner makes the wine. Steve Dorner's been doing wines there for a while, and he's just a fantastic producer of not only Pinot, but they do a Syrah that I love. They do some whites that are great as well. So this is a great winery. They're actually from Willamette Valley, which is the most important region in Oregon and one of the most important Pinot Noir producing regions in the world. It ranks up there with any place in California, Russian River, Sonoma Coast. If you go to some kind of smaller areas in the Central Coast, Willamette's doing it as well, if not better. It just depends upon style, what you like more. And honestly, Burgundy as well. I mean, Burgundy is my favorite region, but Oregon does Pinots of equal quality. And in particular within Willamette Valley, they are from Eola Amity Hills. And so in Eola Amity, there's like a little, you have like this mountain, what's the mountain called? I don't know. But there's a little gap basically in this kind of mountain range in Oregon and the Willamette. And Eola Amity is kind of right in that gap. So they're getting a lot of cool air from the ocean. And so it's one of the coolest regions in Willamette Valley. So they tend to produce more elegant wines. And Christum is definitely one of the best wineries in that region. But there's also another winery called Bethel Heights, which I love as well, which I have not seen in Iowa, but it may not be available. But Bethel Heights and Christum both wineries are different in terms of what they're creating. Of course, each one has its own individual characteristics, taste and flavors, but they are similar in terms of they both kind of make these really kind of pure, elegant, beautiful Pinots. They're not ever overly oaky or just kind of manipulated with, whatever else you're doing. It's all about the fruit. It's all about the vineyard site. And especially with Christum, they kind of practice a lot of natural stuff. They are certified sustainable. And it's really all about the land for these guys. So without further ado, let us taste. And so I would apologize for the repeat of the same winery, but this is a very different single vineyard wine. And once you taste it, you will know why I'm not apologizing for anything. The Christum, this got, I was looking this up earlier, this got like 99 points from James Suckling, if you like the whole points thing. So it's a huge rating from Suckling on a Pinot Noir. Usually he likes the big Italian stuff and some other things, but like 94 points from Parker. This nose is incredible. I mean, you could just smell right away. If you've bought in the Mount Jefferson Cuvée a second time and have tasted it, put the Mount Jefferson next to this Jesse Vineyard, and you just right away, both noses are beautiful, but there's an intensity to the single vineyard that is just incredible. And it's still that pure fruit, but it's spice and forest floor, and man, it's just got a lot going on. A little more depth too in terms of color than the Mount Jefferson Cuvée. But Willamette Oregon Pinots at the top level have this nose to them, and it's just Pinot at its finest. That is a gorgeous, gorgeous wine. It's got a little structure to it. And it's something that I think will age really well too. Some of the single vineyards from Christum do age outstandingly, and certain vintage. In 2018 was a good vintage in Willamette Valley. This will age for, I would hold this for like 10, 15 years and just see what happens. If I had like two of them, if I didn't have two of them, I'd probably just drink one now. So the promise of the nose versus the palate. The nose is so astounding. The palate is delicious, but the reason why I say this will age well is because I think the palate, with that a little bit of that tannin, is closed off just a little bit, and I think this whole wine will open up. It's something you could kind of leave in a decanter too if you wanted to, see how the air treats it. But if I was buying a couple of these bottles, I would open one now maybe, or a year from now rather. I'd open one 5 years from now, and then open one 10 years from now, just to see how they progress. These are not available very often. I snatched a 6-pack up for the club as soon as I saw it became available. about 2 months ago. So, man, enjoy this wine. It is drinking well now, but the nose is promising something quite incredible over the next 5 to 10 years, maybe even longer. And this is really one of the premier, not only premier wineries in Oregon and Willamette, but just one of the premier Pinot makers literally in the world. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I do, if you don't have the patience like I do to hold it. So enjoy. So the second wine is kind of our surprise wine, or a wild card. And it's called Devil Makes Three, and it's from Southold Farm and Cellars. Now, Southold Farm and Cellars is a little bit, I don't know much about them, other than that they are a farm that makes wine. And they started off, and this wine is 2015 vintage? Yeah, 2015 vintage. It's a blend of mostly Cabernet Franc, and then some Malbec and some Merlot. And they are from, or this wine was made when they still were in New York. So this was a farm and a winery that made wine in New York, specifically on the North Fork of Long Island. So people outside of New York, when they think of New York wines, New York does make quite a bit of wine, but a lot of times what you see outside of New York is mostly from the Finger Lakes. And the Finger Lakes is an absolutely gorgeous region of New York. It is just geographically beautiful. There is some good wine that comes out of there, but I don't find a lot of the wine to be above, it's got a high floor, but not a high ceiling, if that makes sense. If I could parlance into basketball talk for a second. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of really solid wines that come out of there and a lot of good wines that come out, but I don't think there's a lot of great wines that come out of the Finger Lakes. And that's no slight at the Finger Lakes. It's a beautiful region. If you want to vacation somewhere in New York outside of the city and get away, it's quite a bit of a drive, but it's gorgeous. You could take these bus tours and they bring you to different wineries. You can eat, you can drink. The North Fork does make red wine. I think white wines are kind of what work best there, especially with that climate. I think they do make excellent Rieslings, and that's kind of, they do make some Gewürztraminer, some Pinot Blanc. Those wines do best in the Finger Lakes because it's a slightly cooler region. Some of the reds they make are fine, but they tend to be, because it's so cool there, it's just hard to do really good red wine out in the North Fork, or out in, the Finger Lakes. For my money, the best wine in New York comes out of Long Island. There's the Hudson Valley, which makes some wine, and there's a really great winery out there called Millbrook. And Millbrook does a really fantastic Cabernet Franc. They do some stuff also with like Italian varietals, like they make a pretty good Tokai Friulano. But the Hudson Valley does have some good wineries, the best of which is Millbrook, which I don't think ever comes out this way. But it's Long Island that makes, for my money and for what the potential for New York could be, the best wine. And that's for a number of reasons. And the reason why a lot of people haven't heard of Long Island in terms of winemaking is because it took them a while to figure out what to grow in Long Island. At first the Finger Lakes has been making wines a little longer, has more of a reputation for their winemaking. And so they were kind of screwing around with some of those varietals. And then they were kind of messing around with like Pinot Noir a little bit. And then, someone thankfully kind of realized that, hey, we're kind of on the same latitude as Bordeaux. And we have this kind of Atlantic maritime climate. So let's plant some kind of Bordeaux varietals, and that's what they did. And it's the Cab Franc and Merlot do best. And the soil there is a little different from Bordeaux, certainly, especially the left bank is not gravelly. It's definitely more sandy and clay based. So if I was going to compare it to Bordeaux, or to continue to compare it to Bordeaux, it would definitely be more right bank than left bank. And not nearly that quality. They're not even close to there yet for the most part. But every year the reds get a little better and better, and kind of the technology gets better. Now, Long Island, you think, well, isn't that kind of by water? Aren't they? And isn't it like right on the beach? So the best region in Long Island for wine is the North Fork, and so they are surrounded by water, but they don't get broadsided by ocean breezes or salt water or salty sand. It's kind of, again, it's some sand, but also clay. And the North Fork is actually buffered. So there is like the Long Island Sound, the Peconic Bay, and then the Atlantic, but it's buffered by the South Fork. So the South Fork takes the broadside of the ocean. And so the South Fork is good for something. The South Fork is where the Hamptons are. So, but it also acts as kind of like this physical buffer for the North Fork. So it doesn't get because if you were on the South Fork, you can't grow vines because of the salt water, because of you're so close to the ocean. It's, you're not growing vines on a beach. So, all this talk about New York and Long Island and my disdain for the Hamptons makes me miss home. But yeah, growing up in New York, you would go out and you'd visit some wineries on a weekend and it'd be fun. And there were, I remember early wineries that I was tasting like 15 years ago, like Pellegrino and Schneider were really making some impressive wines. And there was some there was a number that were not so great either, but there are some people doing some real work out there. And there were even restaurants in New York that would have, nights where you do a New York, Long Island wine tasting with a tasting menu at dinner and stuff. And so it does a really good job, or New York had in the past done a really good job in kind of promoting and pushing some of these wines forward. But Long Island still has a long way to go, but still really outstanding wine. And so the Southold Farm and Cellar 2015 is the only and last vintage you'll ever see of this, because the farm still exists and still makes good wine, but now they're in Texas making good wine. It is really unbelievable. They moved from New York, where they were doing some really good stuff, to Texas, and they just made wine in Texas and continued on their path. And I've tried one of them before, and it was also fantastic. So the family clearly knows what it's doing in terms of winemaking. I had not had the New York one before, and I gotta tell you, it's one of the more unique noses I have ever experienced in my life. I mean, it's so very Cab Franc, but it's also got this super brightness to it, and spice and herbaceousness. I mean, it's got this weird Christmas in the, like a sweet spice, not like peppery. It's got this like Christmas in a glass thing going. I love it. I don't even need to drink this wine. I could just smell it. The nose is outstanding. The closest thing I could think, I've had maybe some really interesting Northern Rhone, but those are Syrah based. But noses that are kind of like that, being that it's heavy on Cab Franc, it's not a complete goofy comparison. Although I did the other wine club before this, so on my third glass of wine, I could be completely losing it. But the palate is the same thing. It's just bright, fruity, almost leans toward a little, it kind of pushes and goes almost toward raisin, and then comes right back and says, no, I'm bright. I got the basing spice, and now I get the raisin on the end. So you're getting the raisin on the finish. Amarone? This is such a bizarre wine in the best possible way. And I'm so glad this wild card wine worked out the way it did. Not only is it from New York, North Fork, Long Island, where most people have not had wine before, but it's such a bizarre wine. But like I say, in the best possible way. And the finish is still going, and now on the finish, I'm just getting that raisin. So this is something I would drink now or the next year or two. This is not something I would cellar But this is something I would definitely brown bag it, invite some friends over, say, hey, forget about where the wine is from. If anyone gets that, you come in, I'll buy you a bottle of wine. You gotta have some proof though. But just ask them what varietal it is, what they think it is, where it's not, so where it's from, but just what kind of wine? Is it Cab? Is it Pinot? Like, what would you guess? I don't think anyone would ever guess. Varietals or place. The answers you're gonna get are gonna be wild. This is great. Enjoy it. I'm gonna continue to enjoy it off camera. So our last wine is from Washington. Washington is one of my favorite wine regions, not only in the US, or I guess it's a wine region technically, but it's one of my favorite wine producing states in the country. It's kind of neck and neck with California, just because a lot of the stuff they do there is so interesting. You know, they do a lot of whites, a lot of reds. The reds tend to be, they do a lot of single varietals, Cab Sauv, Cab Franc, Merlot. They do a ton of blends. They kind of follow more for the most part, the Bordeaux blending method with a lot of their wines. And it's a wine region that is made up primarily of one giant wine region, right? Columbia Valley. But within Columbia Valley, you have like Walla Walla, Yakima, Horse Heaven Hills, Red Mountain. You have all these little kind of sub-regions within Columbia Valley, some of which are just some of the best grapes in the world come out of these places. And you have the birth of Washington wine with, like, in terms of getting put on the map with like Chateau Ste. Michelle, Columbia Crest, and they both turn into monsters. And by monsters, I mean just the output of production just becomes enormous. And, you know, they're on that Mondavi level of, you know, they got big, they got famous, they started making 8, 9, 10 different labels, you know, 10, 11, 12 different varietals. I haven't had any Columbia Crest in a long time, but, you know, Chateau Ste. Michelle, their kind of higher end reserve Cabernets and stuff are still fantastic. But they also started making like big box supermarket type wines, but most of them, especially on Chateau Ste. Michelle's side, maintained a level of quality that was good, you know, and as big as they got, and eventually sold off and things like that. And I haven't had a bottle of Chateau Ste. Michelle anything in quite some time, but it was these two giants that kind of put Washington on the map. But then, like anything else, you had a lot of these smaller wineries, kind of creeping out from the shadow of these two big production monsters, and people started recognizing Washington for their smaller production, and some of the quality that was coming out of it was just outstanding. And there's a few wineries that always stood out to me in terms of, wow, Washington is just world-class at wine. And so Kilseda Creek, Leonetti, Betts Family Cellars. If you ever see Betts Family, buy it right away. I don't care what it is amazing. Cadence, and our last wine, or winery, Andrew Will. This is one of the wines that kind of, in a small cult way, so it's this dichotomy, right, where you have these giant producers in Columbia Crest and Chateau Ste. Michelle, and then you have these incredibly small artisanal products coming out of these same areas, and just wine lovers are going crazy, like wine connoisseurs and wine collectors are going crazy for these things, and they still do a lot of times, just because the quality is still just so outstanding, and the production is still small. And this is like, so Andrew Will started in, like, I think their first vintage was like 1989, I should really look this stuff up before I actually do these videos. But so right around 1980, I think the first vintage was late 80s, early 90s. And some of these other great wineries that were kind of emerging around the same time. And when I first started in the wine business, I was like, who is this Andrew Will guy? He just makes great wines. These are really incredible, and there's no such person as Andrew Will. It was actually started by Chris Kamadu, and Andrew Will is one is the son, one is the nephew. So one is Andrew, one is Will. But Chris Kamadu is and I'm probably pronouncing the name wrong, but he started the winery, and they've been just producing fantastic wine for, God, going on 30 plus years now. So they make basically four wines, I guess. So they make a wine, and it's all within Columbia Valley, but all subregions. So they make their Shampoo Vineyard, which is out of Horseheaven Hills, actually. Great subregion of Columbia Valley. Some really great wine comes out of Horseheaven Hills. And that's an AVA, like where you have Napa. So imagine Columbia Valley is just a much, much, much bigger version of Napa Valley. And within Napa Valley, you have like Oakville, or you have, I'm trying to think of the mountainous regions, Mount Veeder, or you have Stag's Leap District, or you have Diamond Mountain. And so you have all these subregions, St. Helena, Atlas Peak. And then within Columbia Valley, you have this same kind of deal where it's just, you have Columbia, then within Columbia, you have Horseheaven Hills. And then and that's where their Shampoo vineyards are located. And then they make Ciel de Cheval, which is outstanding. And that vineyard is located in Red Mountain. And Red Mountain does the most high-end, sought-after juice in all of Washington probably comes out of Red Mountain. And then they have Two Blondes Vineyard. And so the Two Blondes Vineyard is in Yakima. So this is another kind of smaller AVA in Columbia Valley. And they do a Cabernet Franc and a Cabernet Sauvignon. And we've done Cab Sauv out of Washington before, so I thought we'd have a little fun and do the Cabernet Franc. I love Cabernet Franc, whether it's from California or Washington in this case, or France. When Cabernet Franc is good, I just love it. It's in California and Washington, they tend to be kind of a little more fruit driven, whereas in France, they tend to be kind of a little earthier, a little more kind of tea leaf and spice and earth, whether it comes from the Loire Valley or the right bank of Bordeaux. So Cab Franc can be different depending upon New World, Old World, where they're made, who they're made by. So for the Andrew Will Cab Franc from Two Blondes Vineyard in Yakima Valley. So yeah, this is definitely more fruit forward, but I still get Cab Franc good Cab Franc always has this really nice, pleasant tobacco leaf kind of nose to it. Even with, this has some oak on it, this has fruit. This is an area that gets a little warmer, so it's a little bigger than something you get from like Chinon or Bourguignon or some more. But still, no matter how much fruit you got in there, you still get that tobacco leaf. Well, so this is big. This is a nice big, meaty Cab Franc. I get the oak, I get the fruit. I do get a little bit of that tobacco and earth to it, but especially on the finish, you kind of let it mellow out a little bit. But this is a big steak wine. I would do this with like a ribeye or a strip. This would be great with lamb. I think I recommend lamb with every big red wine. It's too bad, lamb is delicious. But yeah, this is really big and brooding, and very different from the Christum that we had for the first wine, but also something I really want to see where it goes in 10 to 15 years. The tannin isn't overpowering, but it's got enough tannin and enough fruit and enough acidity where I think it will age really well. So this is another one where I'd be like, well, where are you next year? Where is it 5 years from now? Or if I had one and I had the patience, where is it 10 years from now? Because I think, my guess is that the fruit will dissipate quite a bit, as most wines do when they age. But I love, again, I'm getting on the nose that tobacco and a little bit of that cedar. And so I think more of that'll come out, and that just, to me, is always a lot more interesting. And so when you're looking for wines, how do they age? What do you look for? You know, you look for tannin, you look for acidity, but that fruit is important. Sometimes the oak is important, and then kind of what is underneath that, because when that fruit and oak starts to disappear, what's going to be left over? And if it's all fruit and all oak, well, not much. But if it's like this Andrew Will Cab Franc, if it's like that Christum, its promise is like, ooh, this is why people age wine, and this is why people should age wine, because it gets better. The payoff is there. The Southold Farms, don't age, enjoy now, because it is amazing now, and that's just going to get. It's already exhibiting a lot of secondary characteristics, and it has that raised quality, and that's just going to get more intense over time. But when that drops off, I'm a little worried about not as much being there as opposed to the Andrew Will and the Christum. But all three of these wines were delicious. I'm getting off track a little bit. All three of these wines were great. I really had a good time trying them and kind of talking about them, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. Like I said, I would lay down 2 out of the 3 if you wanted to lay it down, but if you want to enjoy them now, they are drinking well now. So enjoy until next time. We'll see you soon.